This is TechNOW. I'm your host, John Reid, also CEO of CATA Alliance, and we're pleased to have with us some high-powered CIO talent. None other than Charles Duffet, CATA's Senior Vice President and CIO. And Charles is going to share with us some insights on what you should do as an organization in terms of responding to some of our tech challenges. So Charles, I just had a couple of questions, and the first is, help me understand a bit the sort of period of change that we're in.
Yeah, hi John. Thanks for asking that question. Actually, John, I'm looking at right now. I lived through the sort of the 1980s and on, and back in the 80s we had a real issue with mainframes. We were mainframe bound, and if we want anything done, we'd go to the IT group at that time was mainframe. And we'd go to them and we'd ask them for things to get done, and it would take months and sometimes years to get things done, and that's just the way it was. And as the 80s came, PCs came out, we went through a real revolution in our business, that we deployed as users PCs on the desktop because we found that we could use spreadsheets, we could use databases, we could use word processing. We connected them together, we could talk to each other, and as the internet was created, we could do email across the world. And the mainframe groups became less and less and less relevant over time. And we created this whole IT group that could do many things that the other mainframe groups couldn't. They were very slow at responding. So I see today we are in exactly that same mode, where as I talk to IT leaders, and of course I've gone through this as being CIO and other organizations, we fall back to what we know. And this is a real problem for the users. The users will move on with or without us. You can see it through people going through school, universities. You can see it in your own home, that people want to be able to do anywhere, anytime, any device computing. And we're quite capable. The industry is there, they're moving to it. And so I think as an IT group, we've got to start to focus on the business and start focusing on being able to move. And we even have to move out of our comfort zone and leave behind companies that are just frankly too expensive because they're running old business processes where the software is very expensive, the hardware is very expensive, and the maintenance is very expensive. And look to the new technologies and the new ways that we can deploy those kind of technologies.
Well, Charles, that really leads to another question. As you know, CATA is an educational body, best practices. So if I'm a CIO in a small company, large company, or even if I'm not a CIO that's trying to respond to some of these organizational structural challenges, what advice would you give me?
Well, that's great. Again, John, the companies that I'm mentoring with now, and I'm trying to get them to move, is that they can't stay isolated in their IT groups anymore. That you really need to get involved with the business. And there's definitely a disconnect in most organizations that I've been to, that there's a disconnect between the business and the IT organization. The IT organization can put in the tools that the business requires, but the business has to define what requirements that they have. And often the business leaders aren't there, and it leaves the IT group in a very awkward position where they're trying to pick tools but don't have the business leadership to be able to know what problem that they're really trying to resolve. And often it's the case that they don't come up with resolving exactly what the users want. The business units get frustrated with them, and again, they try to go out and deploy their own solutions. So the advice I would have is get very business focused. Get your business leaders to get involved. Often is the case, you'll need to bring somebody in. Bring in a consultant. Don't be afraid to go out to the consulting world. Don't try to do everything in-house. you will be more of a hero if you go out and bring in an expert. Technology is very complicated these days, and it's like being in the medical profession. You can be a GP, but you don't necessarily know how to do a knee operation, and we bring in specialists for that. It's the same with IT. It's very complicated for the people in information technology. Bring in a good consultant that can help define the business user requirements and work with the IT group to come up with the solutions. Your users will love you for it. Yeah, the business will love you for it because it helps them solve a problem.
So Charles, let's conclude with a bit of forecasting here. Can you look into the future for us? What do you see? What's in your crystal ball?
Well, you don't need much of a crystal ball. You need more of a historical perspective. Gartner did a study years ago, about 20 years ago. They went and said, if you look at the last decade, what were those companies that were on the top? And we saw those companies up on the top. They made a list of them. Then they made a new list that year, like a decade later, of the top 10 companies. And none of those companies that were on the top 10 years ago were still on the top today. And largely because they were stuck with their way of doing things and their business models. And as I find as the decades click by, if I look back 10 years from now, those companies that were there, that were the biggest ones, are either fallen down on that top 10 list or not on the list at all. And new companies that we never thought would be on the technology list are in that top 10 list. And one only has to look at someone like Google to know where they have come from 10 years ago and where they are now. So my advice is the technology or into the future looking, technology is going to change. Stay on top of it and make sure you understand where it's going so that you can understand what the user community needs and where they want to go. The technology will definitely change. In 10 years from now, the companies that we have today that are in the top 10 probably won't be there, or there'll certainly be a big change at that time. So stick with the change.
Well, we're signing off now for TechNOW. Thank you, Charles Duffet, Senior Vice President, CIO, for providing some very good insights for our community. So stay tuned until next time.